Hello again, everyone, and welcome back to Reddit Aliens. I'm John, and as always, thank you so much for being here. Good topic? Let's do it. Campers of Reddit, what's the creepiest, scariest, or most disturbing thing that has happened to you out in the woods? Please remember to like, share, and subscribe.
Boyfriend and I planned a 5-day trip in Southern California. We had met each other while then hiking the Appalachian Trail, so we both had plenty of experience. We went to Whole Foods to buy our food for this trip and indulged. For such a short trip, we weren't worried about our packs would be too heavy. We wanted to eat excellent food. So the second day we hiked to a site that was perhaps 30 meters from a dirt service road. By the road, there was a large trough to feed horses. We decided to put our food bags under that, as it was large and heavy and already overturned. The structure would keep us safe from bears and our food safe from animals. When we awoke in the morning to retrieve our food, half of it had already disappeared. I mean, from the 2 food bags. Someone had picked out select foods and taken them. This was not an animal, it was a human. Wondering if this other person saw us come and place the food there while we thought we were alone creeped me out. We were miles from the nearest town, so even though there was a service road, it's not like we were near any civilization. We turned around and went back, as we no longer had enough food for our trip. I grew up down a long dirt road in rural Alabama. My family owns a decent amount of land. I still miss the peacefulness sometimes, but I'm a gamer, so I need my high-speed internet. Anyway, the first time my friend and I decided to camp by ourselves, we were about 12 years old. We picked a spot in a field that was right at the edge of the woods. We really weren't that far from the house. The distance between us and the house was approximately 500 to 600 yards. The distance was sufficient to instill a sense of bravery in us, but it was also close enough to allow us to quickly return to the house if needed. Everything was going fine. We had a tiny fire and plenty of junk food to gorge ourselves with. The situation deteriorated around 10 or 11. We were both just sitting and staring at the flames. There wasn't much noise that night because it was early winter and the bugs had vacated by that time. So we all heard was the crackling of the fire and the occasional wind gust blowing what few dead leaves might have remained on the trees. That's when we heard it. I couldn't say exactly how far away the sound was, but it came from the woods. It was a blood-curdling scream. To this day, I've never heard anything in the wild that would make you as uneasy as that sound. We both looked at each other, and I know that we were thinking, run to the house. But we were tough kids, right? So we decided we'd lock ourselves in our tent and brave this new danger we'd discovered. Neither of us had any clue what the noise was, but we knew we weren't setting a foot outside the tent until the sun came up. My friend ended up actually falling asleep an hour or so later. I didn't have an easy time though. I could see the dying light of the fire glimmering through the tent fabric. I just lay there, watching the light dance until something disturbed it. It seemed as if the fire had gone out completely, but then it returned. I quickly realized that something had passed between the fire and the tent. I covered my head with my sleeping bag. I was utterly terrified. I never heard a sound, no footsteps. Nothing interfered with the food we had outside. 30 minutes later, I had to uncover my head because I was sweating profusely and felt like I was suffocating. The remnants of the fire continued to emit a faint glow. I couldn't see or hear anything else. I lay there for probably another hour before I finally fall asleep. I wake up to sunlight. My friend was already up and outside. We discussed the scream, and I told him what I'd done after he fell asleep. We looked around and could see no tracks of any other signs that something else had been there beside us. It wasn't until years later, and a couple of sightings from different people, that we found out what actually made that sound. A panther. I went on a camping retreat with a group of friends when I was just out of high school. We stayed at a campground that was made up of many cabins that had those metal bunk beds and large main cabin with a kitchen and socializing area. The first night up there, I wanted to walk around the campground's woods. I walked along some trails until I could no longer see the lights from the cabins, and it was practically pitch black. After a little while, my night vision kicked in, and I continued my exploratory hike. I was walking in the dark for about 15 minutes when I noticed a shape in the path ahead of me. I stopped and tried to make out what was there. About 100 feet, say 30 meters, ahead of me was some small guy or kid standing in the middle of the path. He was standing completely still, and it appeared he was standing in the middle of a bridge that the path led to. I remained silent and began to retreat, maintaining my focus on him. It was far too dark for me to make out any details about him from where I was. All I could really see was that he was standing completely still. Finally, I lost my composure and hastily returned to the campground. When I got back, I told my friends about what I just saw, and of course, a bunch of them wanted to head out to check out what I found. So, a bunch of us grouped up, and I led them back to the bridge where I saw the person standing. As we neared the location, I observed that he remained stationary. We all kind of stopped and waited. We started whispering to one another about what we should do now. Some wanted to turn back around, and others want me to go over to him to see if he's okay. Being stupid, I agreed. I went ahead of the group and inched my way toward the figure. I was prepared to react quickly if anything seemed amiss. I approached cautiously, and upon reaching the head of the bridge, I finally discerned the shape's true form. It was an upright vacuum. Someone had stuck an upright vacuum in the middle of a hiking path for some reason. I guess seeing something so foreign to the surroundings, along with it being completely black and white and dark, made our imaginations go a bit wonky. Overall, this was pretty mundane, but the whole experience had stuck with me now for decades. So I and 3 of my buddies, Andy, Kurt, and Morgan, were hiking the Appalachian Trail over summer break. We were only going to be out 3 to 4 days, doing a section in PA. Nice. On day 2, we were multiple miles into a state forest and multiple miles away from any roads or towns. As planned, we made it to a public shelter right around dinner time. The shelter had a roof and 3 walls with some food and wooden bunks built in. We were hustling to get there as some clouds had been rolling in. We pretty much drop our bags at the shelter and it starts to rain. It was a typical summer rain, pouring in for about 30 minutes before dissipating to reveal blue skies and sunshine. So, we were glad to start building a fire and getting dinner ready. About 5 minutes after the rain had stopped, we heard someone coming down the trail thinking, "Oh man, they must have been caught in the rain." However, first around the trail is a happy little corgi, dry with his feet barely wet. The corgi ran up to us. We all had our snacks out and started begging for food. A middle-aged man slowly moved down the trail behind him. He wore blue jeans, a white t-shirt, and cowboy boots, carried no gear, and was completely dry. At the point, we all start looking at each other because none of this makes sense. We nervously play with the dog for a few minutes as the man takes his sweet time making his way over to the shelter. He walks up and says hello and doesn't really engage in any conversation. Seems a bit socially awkward, and we were all too bugged out to try and ask him questions. He came within about 10 feet of us and was just walking around and seemed to be enjoying the scenery. We all looked at him and agreed that he was completely dry. His white t-shirt and jeans made it easy to determine if he was wet or not. He then says goodbye and starts to walk back the way he came. They began beckoning the dog to follow him, yelling, "Toby, Toby, come on boy." The dog had almost no reaction to these remarks. Granted, we had food, but you would expect some kind of reaction. Then I looked closer at the dog, and it was wearing a Barbie pink collar and had a metal ring hanging, but no dog tag attached to it. The man kept walking away and called the dog a few more times, eventually disappearing down the trail. The dog stayed a few more minutes and then just walked away in the opposite direction they had came from. The dog simply strolled off into the woods. Once they had both left, we began conversing with one another. No hikers were seen behind us throughout the day, nor were any tents or shelters set up nearby. We all confirmed on our map that the closest road was miles away. We all agreed that he was dry and very strange. We also agreed that the dog appeared to have no connection to him, had a girl's collar, and did not react to the name Toby. We even tried to call it Toby, and it didn't react. So, as our minds race, we decide that this man must be some kind of serial killer hiding out on the trail, living off the hikers he kills, killing one with a dog, and deciding to keep it. From there, we formulate a plan. Andy has some paracord, and we all had tin cans left from dinner. We set up a perimeter of these noise traps around the shelter and across the front opening. We also took the wooden picnic table that was next to the shelter and tipped it up on the side against the front to try and secure us inside. It's nighttime, and the fire pit has become too wet to maintain a fire. We all slept on the top bunks with our knives ready beside us. No one slept. The slightest noise, we jumped and called each other's names to make sure we were together. I would pass out occasionally and snore loudly, startling everyone else. At one point, Kurt got down to look out to the front and almost got stabbed by Andy as he was trying to climb back on his bunk. Subsequently, Morgan was compelled to relieve himself and attempted to exit the vehicle. However, he inadvertently struck the string, causing the cans to sway. As the rest of us prepared to pounce on the silhouette by the front door, Morgan had to yell, "No, it's me, it's just me." Otherwise, he would have faced certain death. Eventually, we made it through the night. The sun starts to come up, and we start taking down the table and traps. Left a note in the shelter sign and book about Toby and the man who was with him. We diverted our path and moved over near a campground the next night, setting up a concealed camp a quarter-mile off the trail. Then, on the final morning, we get to the campground payphones and called in for our extraction. None of us have ever forgotten how terrifying the night was, and since then, we often recall the story of Toby and the man who he was with.
I've spent some time hiking the Appalachian Trail in Pennsylvania, and beautiful and little mini waterfalls, and over by Mount Mincy and Tappanee, you can see a few different states from the peak. But yeah, there's some odd folk out there, but I guess I could go for the whole trail. Obviously I haven't done all of it, but did a good chunk of it. Yeah, but great people, bar none. Well, bar some, because there are some weirdos, but what are you gonna do? Anyway, hi.
I'm walking along Striding Edge at Helwan in the British Lake District. It's quite a sharp glacial areate, which involves some scrambling. It's considered a technical grade 1, suitable for beginners. I'm with a mate, and it's mid-afternoon. One hazard is that the fog descends on the area very, very rapidly. One minute you have low clouds and overcast skies. The next, you can't see 10 yards in any direction. So, it's 10 a.m., and the two of us are making our first graded hike. There's a pub on the other end. We expect to make it for, at the latest, 3. We pass other hikers on the way, exchange pleasantries, and go on our way. It's 10 past 2 when we reach the pub, and we both order pie and pint. The barkeeps ask us if we've just done Striding Edge, and we confirm we have. He then asks if we saw a blonde woman, about 35 or so, with a bright red rucksack. We confirm we have. We spent 5 minutes with her, talking about weather conditions that day. At around 11:30, we climbed above the dew point and into dense fog. We told her about it because we'd descended beyond it by the time we saw her. At best, the coroner knew. We were the last to see her alive. She'd lost footing on a particularly narrow part of the route and tumbled over 100 feet. It's a little chilling knowing that you were the last friendly face someone saw before their death. I had been camping for several days in the mountains when I turned in early one night. Something sniffed my tent around 2 a.m., waking me up. I grabbed my handgun and waited. After a few moments, it happened again. I got my flashlight, opened the tent, and shined it down one side, then the other, only to find out it was snowing, as it had been for some time. As I sat there trying to figure out what was going on, I realized the snow that was falling was building up on the tent side and then was sliding down the side, creating a sniffing sound. I turned back in, greatly relieved. My friend and I decided to camp by a cool abandoned cabin. I was unaware of the cabin's unique history until recently. We had hiked around the area all the time during the day. It's in a valley, so it was already dark and weird, but never spent the night. We made dinner and got in the tent. An hour in, we hear rustling outside. We started to laugh it off, but my dog, who in all the years I had never been afraid of anything, starts to growl. The barking stops after a bit, but the hair is still up on the back of her neck. Then she starts pacing around the inside of the tent, as if she's keeping a protective perimeter around us. My buddy and I huddled in the middle of the tent, trying to sleep, while my dog paced around us for several hours. We eventually fell asleep. Everything was fine in the morning. Not the first time I found some weird stuff in the woods. I have done a lot of camping. Here are the greatest hits. Hiking into a campsite in central PA, we encounter a lone person along the trail. He was holding an axe. No big deal, we're in the woods, right? So we say a friendly hello, no reply. He keeps looking at us, holding the axe in a ready-to-attack manner, with a very unpleasant look on his face. He turned and stared at us as he tried to steer clear. Creepiest, dude. I spent my late teens camping with a group of about 10 people. We were camping in a remote and uninhabited area. We all got pretty drunk, so drunk that none of us noticed that Mama Bear and her cubs ransacked all our food packs, which were hung 25 feet in the air, and ate about half our food and completely stole one of our packs. We assumed it was raccoons until we saw the size of the teeth marks puncturing some of the plastic containers. Rangers confirmed later that morning the presence of Sasha and her cubs in the area. Nobody woke up. Some runoff was strong during a spring canoe camping trip, causing the river to swell and flood. As we approached a bridge, there's only about 12 inches of clearance, so we have to essentially lay in the canoe and ease them under the bridge. It was touch and go, because the river is also moving fast, so you have to back paddle hard to ease up to the bridge so you don't tip over. Just as we got under the bridge, we saw a bunch of people in boats who started yelling that we should have our life jackets on. It turns out that an hour earlier, another group of canoers had come that way, tipped, and were searching for a body. My parents heard about it and assumed it was me or a friend. They dispatched someone to confirm it wasn't me or a friend. My boss and his dog, colleague, and I were on a hunting camping trip in the California desert some years ago. We all had firearms, and the plan was to do a survival camping experience where we would only carry water, food for the dog, and some emergency food and communication sets. We were set up very deep inside the desert, and the nearest town was probably an hour's drive away in our 4x4 rental truck. 2 days in, and we haven't caught anything, and the heat's driving us crazy. On the second evening, while we were out on the hunt, we see what looks like mountain lions droppings around our camp. No big deal. We've got firearms and stuff on us. We return to the base empty-handed on the third evening as well, having not eaten solid food for 3 days and surviving only on water. We start a campfire and put our heads down for some rest, and my friend sees 2 sets of eyes staring at us in the distance. We bring the dog, and the dog goes batshit crazy looking in the same direction as the eyes. We scramble into the tents, bring out our rifles, and wait for something to happen. This standoff lasts for about 10 minutes, and we notice the animals move around a bit as we watch it. We don't fire our rifles because killing what looks like a mountain lion would invite a ton of trouble, and we just wait. At some point during this, the animals turned around and just left. I've never been more scared in my life. We packed up all our stuff while one person stood guard with a loaded gun. We locked the car doors, rolled up our windows, and simply departed. To this day, we're convinced that it was a mountain lion. Occasionally, we think it was because we were crazed by the heat and hunger. However, this doesn't explain why the dog barked. We don't know. I recently went winter camping at a nearby state park. I enjoyed a pleasant hike, located my campsite, and made myself comfortable for the night. The campsite was near a park road, only about 200 yards or 0.18 kilometers from the road, but on the other side of some trees, my tent wasn't visible from the road, which will be important later. Just as I was starting to drift off to sleep, I heard footsteps coming down the trail toward my site, and when I opened my eyes, I could see a beam of light scanning the woods on the other side of the pond I'm camped by. Then the light sweeps toward me, hits my tent, turns off, footsteps retreat. I'm a little spooked, and by now I'm definitely making sure my knife is handy, but I figure it was maybe another hiker searching for a place to camp who saw me and turned off the light once he realized someone was already in the site. Either that, or it was the rangers checking on me. I'd filed an itinerary with them. So then I finally do drift off to sleep, only to be awoken about 30 minutes later by a vehicle coming down the trail toward my tent. I can hear it crunching on the gravel trail, steadily growing louder as it gets closer. Again, I see lights sweeping the woods across the pond, this time headlights. And again, they come around the bend in the trail, shining directly onto my tent. At this point, I'm spooked. Knife in hand, I call out, "Hello?" When I do, the vehicle backs up, turns around, and retreats up the trail. At this point, I'm really spooked. I called the park office and had service, thankfully, but there was no answer. I decided to call 911 for help. I informed them of my location, and she instructs me to remain calm, thereby placing me on hold. What's going on? When she comes back, she tells me that officers are in the area looking for someone. I ask if she can give me any more information about what the problem is, so I can help. I'm an experienced backpacker, and my day job is 911 operator, but she won't tell me anything. I inform her that I'm a dispatcher, and if the issue is related to a missing hiker or suspect, I will monitor the situation if she provides me a description. However, she remains unresponsive, so we disconnect. I'm not sure who they were searching for, but I'm confident it had to be a suspect. It was the middle of the winter, and I only saw one other person in the park all day, an old man walking his dog close to the trailhead where I started. Between the cold and the incident, it was definitely my second worst night out backpacking. I did some backcountry camping in the Boundary Waters in Minnesota, and I decided this was the trip that I would forget about my tent and just sleep in my hammock with a tarp draped over. One of the nights there was a terrible thunderstorm. My friends were all asleep in their tents, while I lay awake in my hammock,
feeling very exposed. I never quite realized how lovely a tent is in terms of psychological security. A wall of fabric is pretty much only going to stop bugs, but not being able to see the darkness and the things that move through it is pretty great. Anyway, my hammock is hanging atop a hill overlooking the lake below. As lightning lights up the lake below, I see wolf silhouettes moving briefly. The problem with relying on lightning to see is that you get temporary night blindness in the seconds following the strike. So I'm watching the park get lit up for a second or so, and it looks like the wolves are closer. The sky lights up, and they're a little closer. They're getting closer and closer. At this point, I feel distinctly like a pig in a blanket, lying in my hammock, where something can roll up and take a chunk out of my ass. The sky lit up again, and the silhouettes were gone. I didn't see them again, but that didn't stop me from having the most fitful sleep of my life that night. I may have only gotten an hour of sleep before the sun started coming up. Camping alone last weekend in a pretty isolated spot, and 2 flashlights lit up my campsite at around 10:30. Blood ran cold. I extinguished the lights, inserted my knife into my undergarments, and struck the ground. 2 guys crossed the river and started making their way toward my camp. I doused my fire with water to extinguish the glowing embers, but they remained fixed on my location, directing their high-powered flashlights toward the trees I was hiding behind. When they were about 20 meters away, I jumped up, hit them in the eyes with my own 300 lumen light, demanded to know what they were doing, and told them to put their lights down. At first, I feared they were poachers investigating someone camping in their territory, but they were wearing wetsuits and said they were out fishing. I expressed my fear and wished them a restful night. Adrenaline is a hell of a drug. Seeing a half-naked tattooed man jump out from behind a tree and start yelling probably gave them a scare too. Let me preface this with saying I don't believe in supernatural stuff. Anyways, this was when I was maybe 19. My buddy and I used to load up a little car and drive to a spot that was on a river. It was probably 50 miles away from anything. We got out there about 5 a.m., did some fishing, set up our tents. The night is when things got weird. I had this really weird dream. I was walking through a grove and came upon a tree. This tree was radiating pure evil. It's hard to describe. It was an infection, a parasite, and it shouldn't have been there. It felt like death and decay, that dry, burnt smell old buildings get. The smell that makes the hair stand up on your neck. It felt like that smell. I just stood there in front of this tree and let it run its tendrils through my body. I woke up in a sweat, but the image of that tree lingered in my mind. I couldn't shake that feeling the entire trip. I felt like I did in a dream. This incredible sense of dread and helplessness profoundly altered my mood in the face of this tree that was infesting the earth. My friend noticed something was wrong, but I just couldn't explain how awful this dream was. About a year later, alongside my uncle's property up in the Texas hill country, when I caught a whiff of that smell. In a millisecond, every one of those things I felt in their dream came rushing back. I became terrified and agitated. Towering over me was a large oak tree that had died probably 10 years ago. I stayed far away from that old tree. My cousins and I used to do a lot of camping in all seasons. One fall, we went to one of our usual places, a little ridge that formed almost a bowl shape, perfect for us and our supplies. It's about a mile hike into the woods from where we parked. Well, that night it's late, and we're all sitting around the fire talking and smoking some weed. We can hear coyotes off in the distance. After a few minutes of hearing the coyotes sound off a few ridges away from us, we start hearing rustling from the ridge above us. Then, we hear more coyotes howling, even closer than the first ones. The first ones sounding off again, and the rising we heard seemed intensified. They were getting excited and restless. We're all looking at each other, completely silent by this point. One of my cousins reaches behind him and grabs his gun and a big mag light. He stands up and walks to the edge of the fire's light and shines his mag light up the ridge above us, and the eyes, all the pairs of eyes. There had to have been at least a dozen just on that ridge. He shined the light all the way around us, and everywhere there were more eyes. In total, there had to have been 3 dozen coyotes, the biggest pack I've ever seen. My cousin fired off a few shots, hoping to scare them off, but they barely so much as flinched. It was a long night. We took turns sleeping in shifts, making sure our fire never went out. The coyotes would come in closer, just feet outside of the firelight, and wait, knowing you were on the hunt and that these animals considered you their prey was frustrating. Sometime before dawn, they slipped away without us noticing. My cousin reported that he glanced up, only to find them gone. There wasn't a single set of eyes left. This was easily the most terrifying thing I've experienced while camping. This will probably get lost in the mix. It didn't. But I used to live on the big island of Hawaii, where the current lava eruption is going on. My girlfriend and I at the time decided to go camping at Mackenzie State Park along the coast in the Puna district. We had intended to stay for 4 nights, but ended up only staying 2 nights. Despite hearing about its haunting history, I dismissed it and made sure not to bring it up with my girlfriend. The first night around 2 a.m., we woke up to what sounded like multiple people using a pickaxe on lava rock and groaning. The noise went on for what seemed like a few minutes and then stopped. It was particularly strange because there were only 2 other people at the park that night, and I was certain they weren't using a pickaxe. We eventually fell back asleep and asked the other people the next morning if they heard it, and they had not. The second night, it was just my girlfriend and me at the park. I'm getting goosebumps right now thinking of what happened. It was around midnight when I woke up to what sounded like someone sprinting back and forth outside of our tent. Like they were sprinting back and forth at full speed. I was the only one up and turned my light on, and it stopped. Despite my initial fear, I eventually drifted back to sleep. A couple of hours later, my girlfriend is squeezing my arm and whispering directly into my ear, "Someone's outside the tent." It sounded exactly like a couple of hours earlier of someone running back and forth. Someone then lifted the corner of the tent closest to me off the ground and shook it back and forth. We both began yelling, causing the tent to collapse. I immediately grabbed my light and small machete and went outside. Nothing. Nobody around. We found ourselves alone in the coastline in the middle of the night. My girlfriend was panicking at this point, so we literally picked up the tent with everything in it, threw it in the back of the truck, and got out of there. After that happened, I talked to locals and said stories like this were not uncommon at all. If you research Mackenzie State Park, you'll discover numerous accounts of the park's haunting. We're definitely not the only ones who have heard people outside our tent messed with it. Needless to say, we never camped there again. A friend and I were camping at Mount Mitchell late in the fall, around the time it gets chilly. At the entrance of the trail was a sign that said to watch out for bobcats. We hiked a few miles into our campsite and tried to start a fire, but to no avail. It had rained the night before, and all the wood and detritus was damp. As dusk approached, we set up our hammocks and made the decision to end the night. It was freezing at this point. I already had multiple layers and my jacket on, so I brought out the space blanket. After an hour or so of tossing and turning, my friend asked from a distance, "Are you cold?" I replied, freezing my tits off. We tried to spoon and use our body heat to warm up, but that wasn't working either. So we decided to hike back to my car in the middle of the night with only dim headlamps guiding our way in the darkness. Not long into our journey back, we saw a pair of glowing eyes, low to the ground, about a foot off the trail to the left in the distance. It was too close to pass by unnoticed, so we decided what to do. We decided to charge at it, blowing our bear whistles and screaming at the top of our lungs, hoping to scare it off. The creature remained unflappable and maintained its position,
As we approached, we came to understand that the creature was a small dog, simply going about its business outside its owner's tent. The experience was an adrenaline rush from our perspective, and probably a frightening one from theirs as well, being rudely woken up in the middle of the night like that. The incident happened last summer. I was at a campsite near Mammoth, and I was in a pretty big tent with my girlfriend and her family. We were camping in a forest area, but there were hundreds of other people as well. One night I woke up to hearing a loud thud and a giant roar. I thought I was dreaming at first because I had never heard a sound like that before. It turned out to be a black bear trying to open the big black plastic crate of food we had left out. He took a significant portion of the crate before he left. The next night before bed, we put the plastic box in a spare tent away from our site just in case he came back. The next night he came back, and we woke up to him ripping the tent open. Everyone was freaking out. We set off a car alarm, which caused him to run off. However, he had already gotten really close to our tent before that. The next time, one of the families that was with us was so scared, they rented a hotel room for the rest of the trip. The next night, we literally put everything in our car, hoping it would deter the bear from coming back. He came back again, but he sat on top of this hill and was just staring. 2 glowing eyes were all that were visible when we shone a light in the darkness. He never came back after that, but we didn't sleep the rest of the trip.